Before we dive in, if you enjoy gripping HFY sci-fi with cinematic twists, make sure to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more stories that prove humanity is far from ordinary. The forest was too quiet. The hunters moved in a predatory line, their boots sinking into the damp soil as mist curled between alien trees like living smoke. Above, silver moons bled pale light across the landscape, painting the world in shades of steel and bone. Cathor kept his breathing measured as the infrared scope strapped to his mask painted thermal silhouettes onto his visor. No sign of movement yet, just the faint radiation echoes of a recent battle. Something had happened here. He raised a clawed hand. The column behind him stopped on instinct. Trained killers didn't need words, only signals. The others, 7 seasoned trackers armed with silent plasma carbines, spread out, scanning the undergrowth with the patience of creatures who knew how easily a hunter could become prey. Cathor inhaled deeply. Even through the mask's filters, the copper tang of blood reached him. Not fresh. But not old either. The apex was here, murmured Reth, his second. His voice was a rasp, barely more than a breath. Cathor didn't reply. He didn't need to. Everyone in the squad had studied the same reports, memorized the same grim statistics. Apex encounters were never clean hunts. They were massacres with survivors measured in fingers, not dozens. Ahead, moonlight kissed a field of wreckage, drones shredded like tin. A ruined sentry unit lay folded into itself, its armor plates peeled apart as though by hands far stronger than theirs. Cathor crouched beside a metallic rib cage torn open, running a talon along the gouge marks. Deep, deliberate. Not a frenzy. A message. "It's playing with us," whispered someone in the back. "No," Cathor said, standing. "It doesn't play." The apex had been hunted on 3 worlds. It was a bioengineered relic of humanity's wars, part predator, part war machine, capable of tearing apart armored carriers with ease. It shouldn't have been here. The colony had been evacuated 2 standard cycles ago after a raider strike. Every warm body had fled. Except, apparently, the thing they feared most. Cathor checked the tracker again. The faint heat signature ahead flickered like a heartbeat. Moving. Slow. Almost hesitant. "Advance," he ordered. The squad moved like wraiths, weapons up, senses stretched to breaking. The deeper they went, the stranger it felt. No birds. No skittering creatures. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. A shrill sound broke through the silence. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't the guttural growl of an apex predator warning its hunters away. It was sharp. A sound too fragile, too human. A child's cry. Several hunters froze, confusion leaking into their precision. Cathor felt it too, a creeping dissonance like hearing laughter at a funeral. The apex lured sometimes, yes. Could mimic sounds. But never human cubs. That wasn't part of its profile. "Sound triangulation," he snapped. Reth tapped his device. A soft ping marked the direction, 60 meters northeast, near the collapsed skeleton of an old habitation unit. Cathor gestured. The squad fanned out. They reached the edge of the ruins within minutes. Vines curled through shattered steel frames. The cry came again, softer now, trembling. A signal or a trap, it didn't matter. They would find the source. Cathor raised his rifle and slid through a breach in the wall, motion sensors whispering in his ear. The shadows inside shifted with the wind. Then something massive stirred in the corner. A shape uncoiled. Even crouched, the apex dwarfed him. Its obsidian carapace caught the moonlight in cold reflections, its elongated skull haloed in mist. Its chest rose and fell with controlled breaths, steady, watchful. For a heartbeat, Cathor felt his blood chill. He had seen the creature on footage, but seeing it breathe was something else entirely. Predators didn't radiate presence. They simply owned the air. The squad surrounded the entrance. Cathor's hand tightened on the trigger. One wrong move and this place would become a slaughterhouse. Then he saw it. Beneath the creature's bent arm, pressed against its chest, was a small bundle wrapped in dirty fabric. Pale skin. Blonde hair streaked with ash. A human boy. He was shivering, eyes wide but unfocused, lips blue with cold. And the apex was shielding him. For a long, impossible moment, no one moved. The apex shifted slightly, positioning its bulk between the squad and the child, muscles rippling beneath thick armor. It didn't snarl. It didn't lunge. It guarded. "What in the void?" Reth breathed. Cathor's mind raced. Apex were engineered to destroy human soldiers, not cradle their young. It was unnatural. Dangerous. And yet, in the silence, something became very clear. The creature wasn't here to lure them. It was protecting the boy from them. Cathor stepped forward. The apex's head turned, slow and deliberate, twin slits burning faint blue in the dark. It didn't bare its fangs. It simply watched. "Commander," whispered Reth through the comm. "Orders?" Cathor's finger hovered over the trigger. Protocol was simple: eliminate the apex. Collect proof. Get paid. No witnesses. But the boy complicated everything. A clean shot would mean hitting the child too. He couldn't order that. He lowered the muzzle. "Hold." A flicker of movement from the boy drew his eye. Tiny fingers reached out weakly, pressing against the creature's arm as though clinging to warmth. The apex didn't flinch. Behind him, one of the hunters hissed, "It's bonded." "That's impossible." "Quiet," Cathor said. The forest outside creaked in the wind. Somewhere distant, metallic wings screeched, a reminder that they weren't the only predators on this planet tonight. He glanced back at the apex. This wasn't the monster from the dossiers. This was something else. Something smarter. He exhaled slowly. This hunt had just become a war he wasn't sure he wanted to fight. Cathor tapped his comm. "Command, we have visual," he said. "But it's not what we expected." Static hissed back, followed by a clipped voice from the consortium. "Eliminate the target. No exceptions." He stared at the apex, at the shivering boy pressed against its armored chest. No exceptions. The apex shifted its weight, eyes narrowing slightly as if it understood the tension in the room. The boy coughed, a fragile sound that cut deeper than any order. Cathor made his decision. "Negative," he said into the comm. "Situation is compromised. Awaiting further instruction." "Cathor," Reth whispered, "what are you doing?" "Surviving," Cathor replied softly. The apex's gaze didn't waver. In that silent exchange, Cathor realized something he hadn't wanted to admit. The apex wasn't the only one being hunted tonight. Outside, the wind carried the distant thrum of approaching ships. Reinforcements. Command wasn't going to wait. The apex lowered its head protectively over the boy. Cathor raised his rifle, not at the creature but at the entrance behind him. If they were going to survive what came next, the rules of the hunt were about to break. The first light from the gunships bled through the trees like a rising storm. And for the first time in his life, Cathor wasn't sure which side he was on. Cathor hadn't blinked in nearly a minute. The apex remained in its crouch, its massive frame wrapped around the trembling boy like a living shield. The wind outside carried the distant rumble of incoming engines, low and rhythmic, the sound of approaching consortium gunships. Cathor knew what came next: orders, precision strikes, and blood. Reth moved to his side, lowering his voice to a growl. "Command isn't going to like this. You know their standing order." Cathor's jaw flexed beneath his mask. "Command isn't here." The boy stirred weakly, his breath visible in the cold air. His tiny fingers dug into the apex's forearm, gripping with the fragile strength of someone who had already learned the world could vanish beneath him. The creature tilted its head down toward him with unnerving gentleness, exhaling in slow gusts. Cathor found himself studying that gesture, protective, almost parental. It wasn't in any field manual. Reth's eyes flicked nervously toward the entrance. "We have less than 5 minutes before those ships land. Once they do, this place turns into ash. They'll fire whether the child's there or not." Cathor didn't respond immediately. He was listening, to the forest, to the distant engines, to the boy's labored breathing. He wasn't a soldier who acted on instinct alone. He calculated. And the numbers here were ugly. He stepped closer to the apex. The other hunters tensed, barrels rising, fingers tightening on triggers. The apex didn't flinch. Its gaze locked onto him, cold and intelligent, reading the smallest shift in his body language. "You understand me?" Cathor murmured. He wasn't expecting an answer. But something flickered in the creature's eyes. A minute, deliberate narrowing, a controlled stillness. That was enough. Cathor slowly crouched until he was at eye level with the boy. His mask's lenses adjusted automatically, softening the glare. The boy stared at him, unfocused at first, then blinked as though surfacing from a nightmare. His lips moved without sound. "It's all right," Cathor said quietly, though he wasn't sure why. The words felt strange in his mouth. Comfort wasn't part of a hunter's duty. But the boy's trembling eased just barely. Behind them, one of the hunters hissed impatiently. "Sir, permission to neutralize the target." Cathor rose slowly, still between the apex and his squad. "Denied." The man spat the word back. "It's an apex. You've seen what it does. It's just waiting for us to lower our guard." Cathor met his gaze. "If it wanted us dead, we'd already be." That silenced him, but it didn't erase the unease hanging in the air like smoke. These men had built their lives on killing creatures like this. To see one behaving like anything but a monster rattled the structure of their certainty. The distant engines deepened into a throbbing pulse. Cathor tapped the comm command. This is Cathor. We've confirmed the target. Situation has changed. There's a human child here. Static cracked before the voice came back, clipped and cold. Orders unchanged. Eliminate the apex. If collateral occurs, it is acceptable. He shut off the channel without replying. Reth's hand landed on his shoulder. Cathor. Don't make this your fight. But it already was. He'd lost a sibling to a raid when he was young, too young to do anything but listen to the screaming. If someone had shielded her the way this thing shielded the boy, maybe she would have lived. The memory burned like an old scar, quiet but never gone. Cathor stepped closer to the apex again. Listen, he said softly, feeling ridiculous for talking to a creature engineered to kill. They're coming. If you stay here, they will burn everything. You, the boy, all of us. The apex's gaze flicked toward the roof, where the sound of approaching rotors trembled through the structure. It shifted its weight, tightening its arms around the boy protectively. Cathor's heart thudded once hard. Then move. The apex tilted its head slightly, then, slowly, deliberately, rose to its full, towering height. Its claws brushed the ceiling, scraping metal. The boy remained cradled against its chest, tiny in comparison. Weapons clicked behind Cathor. Sir, one of the hunters said through gritted teeth, if you let it out, it kills us all. Then make sure it doesn't, Cathor replied. The apex took a single step toward the entrance. All rifles trained on its skull. Cathor lifted a hand, holding them back. It's not our enemy. A thunderous boom split the air outside. The first gunship had landed, trees shuddering with the force. Harsh white light knifed through the gaps in the structure. The hunt was about to be taken out of his hands. Cathor turned to Reth. We're not handing them over. Reth stared at him. Do you understand what that means? They'll brand us traitors. Cathor's voice hardened. Better traitor than butcher. The apex stepped past him, carrying the boy effortlessly. Its steps were careful, deliberate. A beast trying not to harm something fragile. Cathor followed, motioning for his team to hold formation, not against the creature but around it. Through the broken doorway, the forest glowed with harsh landing lights. Consortium troopers in black armor poured out of gunships, fanning into tactical lines. The moment they saw the apex, rifles snapped up in unison. A voice barked through a loudspeaker. Drop the target or we open fire. The apex lowered its head, the faint growl vibrating through the air like distant thunder. The boy stirred, clinging tighter. Cathor stepped forward before the standoff ignited. This isn't what it looks like, he called. But he knew it didn't matter. To the consortium, this creature wasn't capable of anything but violence. They wouldn't look past the claws, the armor, the reputation written in blood across 3 systems. A red targeting laser cut through the mist, landing square on the apex's chest. Cathor exhaled slowly. One more second and someone would fire. Reth whispered behind him, we're outnumbered 20-1. I know. The boy's eyes fluttered open again, dazed and frightened, his tiny hand clutching at the creature's armor. The apex made a low, guttural sound, not a snarl but a steadying rumble like a heartbeat wrapped in iron. Cathor raised his rifle not at the apex, but at the line of troopers across the clearing. Stand down, he shouted. Every head in his squad turned toward him in disbelief. Reth swore under his breath. You're making a mistake, Cathor, came a voice over the loudspeaker. Cold. Distant. Command itself. Step aside or we'll bury you with it. Cathor's jaw locked. In his mind, the image of a young girl's lifeless eyes burned against the white light of the gunship. Not again. The apex shifted closer, the boy still pressed against its chest, its breathing steady despite the ring of rifles pointed its way. In that moment, Cathor saw it clearly, not a monster, not a myth, but a creature that had chosen to protect something it could have crushed. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then bury me first, he said. The troopers hesitated. Orders crackled in their ears. The apex stared back at them, silent, coiled. The boy's small voice broke through the hum of engines with a shaky, almost inaudible whisper. One word Cathor couldn't understand but felt like a plea. The gunship lights sharpened. The moment stretched, balanced on a blade's edge. And the forest held its breath. The red dot on the apex's chest trembled slightly in the wind, a flicker of lethal precision held back only by hesitation. The clearing had become a frozen tableau, gunships roaring above, troopers locked in formation, and between them all stood Cathor, weapon raised at his own side, daring someone to make the first mistake. The apex didn't move. Its talons were half-curled, its massive frame coiled like a spring, but the boy was still pressed against its chest, his head tucked beneath the creature's chin. That detail mattered. The troopers saw a beast, Cathor saw intent. Cathor, the loudspeaker barked again, sharper now, the voice like steel scraping over glass. Step away from the asset. This is your final warning. Cathor's visor tracked the positioning of the soldiers. 20 rifles. 2 heavy plasma cannons mounted on the gunship's underbelly. 1 apex. 1 child. The math was brutal. Command, he said, voice steady, this isn't what you think it is. The apex has made no aggressive move toward the child. It's protecting him. False assumption. Apex-class bioweapons are incapable of empathy. Step aside. He let the silence stretch, let them hear the engines and their own heartbeats. Reth shifted beside him, every line of his body tense. They're not going to negotiate, he whispered. I know, Cathor said. Something flickered at the edge of the clearing, shadows moving too smoothly to be wind. Cathor's HUD registered thermal signatures circling through the treeline. Command hadn't just brought 1 squad. There were snipers. The apex was already in a cage, they just hadn't pulled it shut yet. Reth leaned closer. If you fight this, you're finished. We're all finished. Cathor didn't look at him. Then make your choice. The apex's breathing was steady, rhythmic. Its eyes tracked every weapon, every shift in the trooper's stances. The boy stirred weakly, and the creature lowered its head, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound escaping its throat, something between a growl and a lullaby. It wasn't human, but it was unmistakably meant to comfort. For the first time in a long while, Cathor felt something fracture inside him. He'd spent his life chasing monsters. What if this one had stopped running? One of the troopers twitched. The targeting laser wavered, then steadied again. Every hair on Cathor's arms prickled. The apex noticed it too. Its shoulders rose slightly, claws flexing, not in preparation to strike but to shield. Fire on my mark, the voice from the gunship said. Cathor moved first. He stepped fully between the apex and the firing line, his body a thin shield against the storm. You pull that trigger, he called out, you kill a child. The silence that followed wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. Command didn't care about innocence. But the troopers on the ground, real soldiers, shifted uneasily. Even through their visors, Cathor could feel the weight of their doubt. The voice on the loudspeaker dropped an octave. You're obstructing a sanctioned kill operation. I'm stopping a massacre, Cathor shot back. In the treeline, a faint red glimmer betrayed a sniper's scope. He filed the location away. If this turned violent, he wouldn't survive long. But neither would they, not with an apex in the mix. The boy coughed, a soft, rattling sound. The apex angled itself to block the wind, drawing him closer. One of the troopers actually lowered his rifle a fraction, confusion cutting through fear. Why is it protecting him? Someone muttered through an open comm. Because it's bonded, Cathor said loud enough for them all to hear. Because whatever this thing was built for, it's doing something different now. A ripple moved through the line. Doubt was a weapon and he wielded it carefully. The voice from the gunship was colder now. This unit was bred for extermination. It's killed hundreds. If it has bonded, it's even more dangerous. Terminate immediately. There was the truth. Command wasn't afraid of the apex killing the boy. They were afraid of what it meant that it hadn't. Cathor's grip on his rifle tightened. Command, I will not authorize fire. You want this done, you'll have to burn me with it. A beat of silence followed, heavy and electric. Reth shifted closer, muttering, You're out of your mind. No, Cathor said, eyes locked on the apex. For once I think I'm not. Above them, the gunship's side bay hissed open. A squad of black-armored operators stepped out, their movements coordinated and predatory. Unlike the frontline troopers, these were enforcers, Command's private teeth. The ones who didn't hesitate. Cathor raised his weapon higher. His team followed, hesitating only a heartbeat before their training snapped into place. They weren't pointing at the apex anymore. They were pointing at their own people. The world narrowed to the sound of breathing engines and the faint wind brushing through dead leaves. The apex shifted, reading the threat, but still didn't strike. Cathor felt something uncanny in that stillness. Not obedience. Not submission. A decision. Cathor, the voice growled. Step aside or be treated as hostile. His reply came out calm like the air before a storm. Then I guess I'm hostile. The first enforcer moved. A sharp hiss split the air as a plasma round cut through the night. Cathor barely saw who fired, it didn't matter. The apex moved faster than thought, spinning its massive frame around the boy. The plasma slammed into its back, searing a smoking crater into the carapace. The boy screamed. The apex didn't. The roar that followed wasn't a sound meant for human ears. It shook the clearing, tore through the treeline, and for a moment even the engines faltered beneath the weight of it. Reth swore violently. Troopers panicked. Enforcers raised their weapons to fire again. Cathor stepped forward bellowing, "Hold your fire." But the apex had already moved. It didn't attack to kill. It surged into the line of fire, one arm raised to shield the boy, the other snapping a trooper's rifle like dry wood. It shoved another aside, claws skimming armor without piercing. Its movements were terrifyingly precise, every blow measured, controlled. A beast that knew exactly how strong it was, and exactly how not to break something small. Reth's voice was a rasp. "Cathor, it's protecting him from us." "I know," Cathor breathed. The troopers stumbled back, confusion fracturing their formation. Command barked through the loudspeaker, demanding coordinated fire, but the soldiers on the ground hesitated. They'd seen something they couldn't unsee. A second enforcer took aim at the boy, bypassing the apex entirely. Cathor didn't think he fired. The shot cracked through the clearing, dropping the enforcer before he could squeeze the trigger. Every head snapped toward him. Cathor didn't lower his weapon. "Anyone who fires on the boy answers to me," he growled. The apex turned slightly, its blue-lit eyes locking on him, not as a threat, but as something closer to recognition. For a heartbeat, Cathor thought it might understand exactly what he'd just done. The forest was no longer holding its breath. It was bracing. Above them, the second gunship began its descent, searchlights flaring across the clearing. Reinforcements. Command wasn't going to stop now. Cathor's pulse steadied into something cold and absolute. There was no walking away from this anymore. The apex adjusted its stance, blood smoking from the wound on its back, the boy still clenched gently against its chest. It growled low, not in warning but in readiness. Cathor turned to his team. "Pick a side." Reth met his eyes. After a long, taut silence, he raised his weapon, not at the apex but at the descending gunship. One by one the others followed. The forest erupted with light. The battle hadn't started yet, but its shape was inevitable. And for the first time, Cathor wasn't the hunter anymore. He was standing beside the predator. The second gunship broke through the mist like a steel predator, its searchlights flooding the clearing in harsh, surgical beams. The air vibrated with the thrum of its engines, branches snapping beneath the wind of its descent. Troopers scrambled into tighter formations, their discipline snapping back like stretched wire. This time, command hadn't sent soldiers. They'd sent executioners. Cathor felt the shift immediately, the difference between men following orders and men sent to end something. The apex stiffened, every line of its massive body going still, its blue-lit eyes narrowing to slits. The boy whimpered against its chest, clinging to the only thing in the clearing that hadn't pointed a gun at him. Command's voice crackled through the loudspeakers. "This is your last warning. Drop your weapon, Cathor. Step away from the asset. Do not interfere." Reth was breathing hard beside him, his knuckles bone white around the grip of his rifle. The rest of the squad was arrayed behind them, not fully loyal, not fully broken. The line between mutiny and obedience was thin enough to tear with a whisper. Cathor lifted his chin. "If you call that a child an acceptable loss, then you're the ones who've lost your humanity." "Humanity," the voice replied flatly, "is exactly why this thing has to die. It doesn't belong in our hands. It doesn't belong anywhere." The apex shifted its weight forward, not to charge but to brace. Cathor recognized the stance, it was preparing for an attack it couldn't fully dodge. Its injury from the plasma shot was smoking, seared into its carapace. Blood, thick and dark, dripped silently into the dirt. Still it did not let the boy go. Cathor's visor tracked the new arrivals. 12 enforcers in specialized armor, heavier weaponry, controlled breathing. They didn't hesitate. They weren't afraid. They were built for this moment. "On my mark," the lead enforcer said into his calm voice, flat as stone. Cathor raised his rifle higher. "Don't do this." The response was a red targeting grid lighting up the apex's chest. The enforcers fired first. Plasma rounds tore through the clearing in a storm of light and heat. The apex spun, tucking the boy against its chest and taking the brunt of the fire. The air filled with the smell of burning chitin, sizzling blood and scorched earth. Its roar thundered through the night, raw, primal and unwilling to surrender. Cathor returned fire. His shot struck the lead enforcer in the shoulder, spinning him off balance. Reth followed without hesitation, and the rest of their squad fractured in a single breath, half firing on the Apex's attackers, half holding their weapons frozen midair. The clearing collapsed into chaos. Troopers shouted over overlapping comms, gunfire cutting through the mist. The Apex moved like a force of nature, no longer still but terrifyingly precise. It lunged low, not to kill but to disarm, swiping weapons out of hands and sending armored bodies crashing into the dirt. Cathor sprinted forward through the crossfire. "Cover its flank," he roared. Reth cursed but followed, laying down suppressing fire that forced a group of enforcers to break formation. The Apex pivoted sharply, one arm wrapping protectively around the boy as it slammed another enforcer into a gunship's landing strut hard enough to dent metal. The child's terrified cries sliced through the battle like a blade. Cathor saw it clearly then, not a monster, not a myth, but something fighting to protect what no one else would. The gunship's cannon adjusted downward, locking onto the Apex. "Fire," Command ordered. Cathor's pulse snapped cold. He didn't think. He launched himself into the path of the cannon's targeting field and fired upward. His plasma bolt hit the barrel's sensor array, shorting it in a burst of sparks. The cannon tilted wildly, overloading. Reth screamed something he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears. The Apex glanced toward him for a split second. Recognition, acknowledgement, something unspoken. The gunship pilot cursed through the comm as the cannon went dead. "We've got a problem." The Apex moved. Not as a beast but as a tactician. It hurled a broken enforcer into the path of incoming fire, pivoted behind a boulder, and positioned the boy in a shielded hollow as though it understood battlefield geometry. Cathor followed, sliding into cover beside it. The creature's breathing was ragged now. Thick blood pulsed from the wound in its back, pooling into the dirt. The boy reached up and touched its muzzle with a trembling hand. The Apex lowered its head slightly, exhaling a slow rumble that vibrated through the stone beneath them. Cathor reloaded, his movements sharp, mechanical. "They're not stopping," he said quietly. The Apex tilted its head toward him. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, predator and hunter, no language, no shared world, just understanding. Above, a third ship was approaching. He could hear the heavier engines, a command vessel. And beneath the noise, something else, the distant wail of another engine, smaller, faster. Not consortium. Human. Reth's voice crackled through the comm. "Cathor, we've got another incoming. It's not theirs." Cathor's chest tightened. If the distress beacon had reached the right ears, there was only one person who could be on that ship. A streak of light tore across the sky, cutting through the gunship's search beams. The newcomer broke through the cloud layer with practiced aggression, engines screaming as it descended. The voice that came through local comm wasn't command. It was human. "This is Commander Drake of the Terran Expeditionary Corps. Lower your weapons." Cathor froze for a fraction of a second. "Drake." The boy's father. The gunships didn't respond. Command didn't answer. They didn't want witnesses. Drake's vessel slammed down hard enough to rattle the ground. The hatch burst open and armored Terran soldiers spilled into the clearing, weapons up, but their formation aimed at the enforcers, not at the Apex. Drake himself emerged last, his face carved into controlled fury. "Where's my son?" The clearing wavered between worlds, the consortium's kill zone and Drake's arrival. Cathor shifted out from cover slowly, hands visible. "He's alive," he said. Drake's eyes cut to the Apex. For an instant, Cathor expected rage, panic, anything but what actually came, recognition. Drake's jaw clenched. "Echo," he breathed. The Apex stirred at the name. Drake stepped forward, ignoring the consortium's shouts to stand down. "That creature is not your asset. It's bonded. It's mine." Command's voice blared through the loudspeakers, livid. "Commander Drake, this is a restricted operation. Step aside." Drake didn't flinch. "That thing saved my son." The boy's weak cry carried across the clearing, cutting through the standoff like a blade. Drake's soldiers moved closer, Terran rifles locking onto consortium enforcers. Cathor stood between them, sweat sliding cold beneath his armor. One wrong breath and the forest would drown in blood. Command's voice hardened to something sharp and irreversible. "Terminate the Apex. Eliminate witnesses if necessary." Cathor raised his rifle again. "They're not witnesses," he said. "They're done letting you dictate who lives and who doesn't." Drake locked eyes with the Apex, then with Cathor. Three beings, three species, drawn into the same violent orbit. The Apex shifted its stance, blood dripping into the dirt, a wounded titan ready to fight until the end. The boy's hand remained against its armor, trembling but unbroken. The gunship lights narrowed. Weapons clicked. And the clearing balanced on the knife edge of a war that none of them could walk away from. The air cracked with the tension of two armies ready to ignite. Red targeting lasers sliced through the mist like threads pulled taut, each one resting on the apex's chest. The creature loomed in the center of the clearing, blood still dripping in rhythmic beats. The boy pressed against its armored sternum. Cathor felt every muscle in his body go wire-tight. The forest was silent except for the engines above and the low, ragged growl rumbling in the creature's throat. Drake took a single step forward. His boots crunched against broken glass and singed leaves. Lower. Your weapons. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the clearing like a blade slicing through cloth. Terran soldiers shifted subtly behind him, their formation snapping into perfect sync. No one moved without his command. Command's voice came back through the gunship's calm, clipped and venomous. You're making a mistake, Commander. That thing is a threat to every world in this quadrant. You don't understand what it's capable of. Drake's jaw tightened. I understand exactly what it's capable of. It bled to keep my son alive. The apex turned its head toward Drake as if recognizing the words. It straightened to its full height, not in defiance but in unflinching dignity. Its breathing rasped against the night, but its stance was resolute. It didn't retreat, even with every gun in the clearing trained on its heart. Reth edged closer to Cathor, his voice low. You realize what happens if someone twitches wrong? Cathor didn't look away from the apex. Then we find out how far we're willing to go to be human. The boy stirred then, weak but alive. His small hand patted the creature's chest like a heartbeat syncing with another. That single gesture fractured the soldier's resolve in a way no speech ever could. A sharp whistle split the air. One of the enforcers, the same who'd been wounded earlier, lifted his weapon, shaking with fear and rage. It killed my team. It's a monster, he shouted, voice cracking. His finger jerked on the trigger. Time fractured. Cathor lunged, Reth dove, Drake roared an order, too late. The plasma round screamed through the air, a streak of blue-white death. The apex moved. Faster than Cathor had ever seen it. It twisted its body, turning its uninjured side toward the blast, taking the full force against its ribs. The sound was a wet, tearing crack. The boy tumbled backward, but before he could hit the ground, the apex's massive hand caught him and shielded him again. The creature's roar split the night. It wasn't pain. It was war. The Terran soldiers snapped into motion. Rounds of pulse fire cut through the mist, dropping 3 enforcers before they could stabilize their aim. Drake barked orders, each one slicing through the chaos with military precision. Cathor. Cathor hit the ground rolling, plasma rifle drawn. He didn't think, didn't analyze. He fired. His shots weren't clean, they were feral. A wall of energy forced the remaining enforcers back toward the gunship. Drake moved through the crossfire like a man who'd spent his life walking through wars. He reached the boy first, scooping him up, holding him tight against his chest. For the first time since the hunt began, Cathor saw the commander's mask slip, a flicker of raw human terror. The apex staggered to its knees, smoke rising from the wound in its side. It didn't reach for Drake, didn't lash out. It simply lowered its head, positioning its massive frame between the soldiers and the gunships, protecting the boy even as its body failed. Reth slid into position beside Cathor, reloading. You seeing this? It's dying for a kid that isn't even its species. Cathor didn't answer. He didn't need to. The gunship engines roared as command barked something through the comms. Something about containment, about unacceptable deviation from mission parameters. And then the sound Cathor dreaded filled the clearing, the power cycle of the ship's main cannon. The apex heard it too. It lifted its head slowly, eyes burning a deep, electric blue that cut through the dark like a blade. It had no illusions. It understood exactly what was coming. Cathor made his decision before his brain could catch up. He stood, rifle raised, and stepped into the targeting field. The voice on the comm snapped, "Step aside, soldier." "You didn't?" Reth stepped up beside him, swearing under his breath. A moment later, 4 more troopers from their unit followed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Drake turned, his son still clutched to his chest, and faced the gunship. If you fire on that creature, you fire on Terran soil. This is not your war anymore. The cannon's hum reached its peak pitch. The air burned with ozone. The apex rose one last time, towering and broken but unbowed. It planted one clawed hand into the dirt, crushing earth beneath its weight, and unleashed a sound that silenced everything, a bellow that wasn't just rage. It was a promise. Cathor felt it reverberate through his chest. Drake met its eyes, and in that wordless exchange, something ancient shifted. The apex turned, slammed one hand down into the ground, and a shockwave erupted outward, pure kinetic force, ripping through the clearing like a tidal wave. Gunships lurched, their stabilizers shrieking. Soldiers were thrown to the ground like paper figures. The cannon's targeting array blinked red, destabilized. Drake used the chaos like a scalpel. Fall back. Cathor grabbed Reth's arm, pulling him into the treeline as the apex moved in a blur of motion, scooping up a massive hunk of debris and hurling it at the gunship. The impact tore through the engine assembly, sending sparks and flames blooming into the night sky. Terran soldiers moved like water, precise and clean. Consortium enforcers scattered. The forest roared with fire and light, but for the first time Cathor realized, the apex wasn't killing them. It was driving them out. When the smoke began to settle, the gunship was a burning wreck and Command's voice had gone silent. Only the sounds of crackling fire and labored breathing remained. The apex swayed on its feet, its wounds deep, blood slick across its chest. Drake stood a few feet away, his son still in his arms, and stepped forward slowly, carefully, like approaching an old friend. "It's over," Drake said softly. The creature's gaze dropped to the boy. A shudder ran through its body. And then, slowly, it lowered itself to the ground, a giant folding into silence. Cathor's throat burned, but he held himself still. Reth exhaled a sound that wasn't quite relief. Drake knelt beside the apex, his free hand resting against its armored forearm. "You kept your promise," he whispered. The apex exhaled once, a sound like wind through broken stone, then its great eyes dimmed to a softer hue, not gone, just resting. Gunfire and orders had faded. What remained in that clearing wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a story, the kind that would ripple through species and governments, through soldiers and monsters, through fathers and sons. Cathor holstered his weapon and looked up at the stars barely visible through the smoke. For the first time he understood why predators become legends. Not because they kill but because they choose what to protect. Behind him Drake held his son close. The apex lay beneath the fading light. And somewhere beyond the wreckage, the old war between humans and everything else took its first, fragile breath toward something new. Cathor didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, a monster had shielded a child. And the galaxy would never forget it.